Tonight we're exploring creepy Reddit horror stories, all while playing Minecraft in the background. If you love scary Reddit horror stories, this video is perfect for you, all while relaxing to Minecraft gameplay in the background. These Reddit horror stories are unsettling, strange, and perfect for anyone who enjoys horror content, mysterious stories, or relaxing Minecraft gameplay while listening. Get comfortable, grab your headphones, and let's dive into the first story. And before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The first story is titled, "My neighbor has been beckoning my children from his window at night." Just reading that title already makes you pause, right? A seemingly normal suburban neighborhood, kids in their beds, and a neighbor acting impossibly wrong. This one's really scary, and it's a reminder that sometimes danger isn't out in the woods or in some abandoned house. It's right next door. I, 33-year-old male, live in Texas with my 8-year-old daughter Alicia and my 4-year-old son, Jay. Their mum has been out of the picture for the past 2 years. She didn't pass away. She's just a piece of shit. And I've managed pretty well as a single father. The three of us lived in a 2-bedroom in a nice neighborhood. I've got a solid job, and the kids are thankfully healthy. Everything was smooth sailing until one night, 2 months ago, during which I was awoken by Jay poking me in the face. He was sobbing violently, though I recognized it as the "I'm afraid" kind of crying, as opposed to the "I'm hurt" kind of crying, which made me a little less worried. Jay's always been nightmare prone, so I assumed that's what was causing him distress. When I asked him what was wrong though, he said, "The man in the next house is making scary faces at me." I'd heard my fair share of Jay's stories about monsters terrorizing him from the dark corners of his bedroom. But this was something new. I assumed he meant our neighbor's house, and the lack of fantastical elements in his description made me uneasy. It felt too specific to be one of his usual nightmares. I got out of bed and walked with Jay in tow to my kids' room. Alicia was awake in the top bunk. From the soft glow of their nightlight, I could see her crossing her arms and scowling down at her little brother. I didn't turn on any lights to give myself a better view of the outdoors and peered out the bedroom window. Their window had curtains on it, but for once they hadn't been drawn all the way, and there was a small opening between them through which Jay must have looked out. One side of the neighbor's house, the one to our left from the street, was visible from Alicia and Jay's room. There were 2 windows on the neighbor's side of the house, but it was too dark inside to see anything. I recalled from what I'd seen in the daylight that the window on the left, the one closest to the front of the house, was the kitchen. I wasn't sure what the window on the right was, as it always had its curtains drawn. I asked Alicia if she'd seen anything, and she shook her head. "He's always having nightmares and crying. I don't want to share a room with him anymore, Dad. I never get any sleep. It's not fair." Of course, hearing that made Jay start crying again, so I let him sleep in my room for the night. He has this TMNT indoor camping tent that he prefers to his actual bed. Honestly, at that point, I half suspected his nightmare to be a ploy to get me to let him camp. Anyway, I guess I'm a total pushover because he slept in that tent in my room for the next 2 nights. On the 3rd night, I was again woken up, but this time by Alicia, who was standing over me and shaking my arm. That kid hadn't woken me up in the middle of the night for years. When I asked her what was wrong, she said, "The neighbor was making faces at me." Those words and the fear in my daughter's voice really put me on edge. I closed the curtains when I said goodnight. "Did you open them?" "Only a little, but it's because I heard a weird noise." "What did you hear?" Alicia couldn't recall exactly. According to her, she had gotten out of bed to see what was going on, and when she lifted the curtain, she saw a light on in the neighbor's window. The curtains in the back room had been drawn back, and our neighbor was standing in his house, right up against the window frame. What was he doing? Alicia thought for a moment, and then made an expression I never want to see on my child's face, or anyone else's for that matter, ever again. I won't do it justice by describing it, but it looked something like this. First, She smiled with both sets of teeth, so that there was a little open sliver between the rows, and then she furrowed her eyebrows. She inclined her head towards me, kind of Kubrick stare-esque, and strained the muscles in her neck. The worst part, though, was what she did with her hands. She held out her left arm, forearm up. Then she clenched her right hand into a fist and moved it back and forth rapidly over her forearm. Poor thing described it as playing the violin. But it seemed pretty obvious to me that my neighbor was pantomiming cutting. Disturbed, I told Alicia to stop and to not make either the expression or the gesture again. I was angry and confused. My neighbor, a man in his 40s, was a bit of a recluse, but he had seemed normal enough in the 3 or 4 times I'd spoken to him. I couldn't fathom why he would do something like that to my kids. After asking Alicia a few more questions, I realized that my neighbor might not have done anything technically, or at least legally wrong. It wasn't against the law to make inappropriate gestures in your own home, but it seemed like he was targeting my kids specifically. Legal or not, I planned to have a little chat with him the following morning. My last question to Alicia was if our neighbor had made any other gestures, and she nodded. Then she started making beckoning, come here motions with both of her hands. I had Alicia sleep in my room for the night as well. I also checked out the window in my kids' room, but like before, I saw nothing. The house was completely dark. The next morning, before work, and after dropping Alicia and Jay off to school, I spent a good 5 minutes knocking on my neighbor's front door. I figured he was home since his car was in the driveway, but he never answered the door. Eventually, I had to leave for work, and as I was walking away, I turned around quickly to see if he was watching me. He was the coward. I saw him for a split second at the front window before he ducked beneath the sill and out of view. Clearly, the guy had problems. I yelled out to him to stop fucking with us and then left. That same night, I put a plan in motion. While my kids slept in my room, I hung out in theirs. It was a Friday night, and I was ready to pull an all-nighter so that I could catch my neighbor in the act. Although I trusted my kids, I wanted to confirm that there was actually something nefarious going on before I escalated things. I made sure the house was locked up and all the curtains drawn, tucked my kids in, and sat on the floor under the window in their room. At around 9, I started marathoning midnight mass on my phone. I didn't want to wear headphones and miss any strange sounds, so I kept the volume low and mostly read subtitles. At midnight, I started to hear strange sounds. Like Alicia said, it's a bit hard to describe. Best I can do is that it was this low, repeated clicking sound. You know the check sound you make to beckon a horse? It was something like that. All I knew is that the sound was undoubtedly coming from a person. After a few minutes of this, the sound switched to what I think was supposed to be a whistle, but it came out all wrong, like someone sucking breath in through their teeth. The sound was so crisp that the neighbor's window must have been open, which was an unsettling thought, given that there was only around 15 feet of space between our houses. Certain that the neighbor was at his window, and that this was my best chance to see him, I stood up and pulled the curtain back in one motion. I saw him right away. There was a dim light on in his room, allowing me to see that horrible expression Alicia had made the night prior. It was one thing to see my child's recreation, but it was far more frightening on an adult. His window was indeed open, and his arms were stuck out into the cold night, violently swiping against each other in a grotesque mimicry of self-harm. When he saw me and realized that he was looking at another grown man and not some poor child, he stopped his erratic motions. His cartoonish grin faded, and another, more genuine emotion settled over his features. Rage. The man grabbed the window and slammed it shut, then closed the curtains with the same forcefulness. I let my own curtain fall. I was a little shell-shocked, I think. Of course, I was perturbed by the sight of the man, by his face and his movement, and the fact that he'd been doing that for who knows how many nights now in an attempt to frighten my kids. However, another detail stuck out as even more concerning to me, which was the fact that I genuinely wasn't sure if the man I had just seen was my neighbor. I'd seen him so few times in the years I'd lived in that house, and I was having trouble conjuring up his face. I sat on the floor for a minute, my blood thundering in my ears. I definitely had enough evidence at that point to call the cops, right? Just as I was about to pull out my phone, I heard a tremendous smack against the glass of the bedroom window. After a brief hesitation, I pulled the curtain back again. There were no lights on in the neighbor's house, and there was also no one outside from what I could see. I pulled the curtains back a little further and saw a handprint in the top corner of the window pane. It's worth noting that our house is on a raised foundation, and that particular window is very tall. So even though the window is on the first floor, the man outside would have needed an insane vertical to get his hand up there. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I explained the situation to them, I quickly walked around the house to see if I could catch a glimpse of the man. My last stop was my bedroom. Once inside, I locked the doors and, while still on the phone with the operator, I took my handgun out of the safe in my closet. My heart was beating out of my damn chest, but I knew I had to stay calm. Even more so when I saw that Alicia was awake and looking out of the tent at me. I reassured her in as few words as I could, whispering that we were okay, but we had to stay very quiet. I sat on the edge of my bed, my firearm ready and my ears straining. My kids' tent was in the corner, and to the left of the tent, in the middle of the wall and directly across from where I sat, was a window. After what felt like an eternity, I saw something. It was a cloudless night, and the moonlight was bright enough that I could see a silhouette through the white curtains. The dark shape was nebulous at first, but became more clear as the man outside stepped closer to the window. Somehow, he knew which room we were in. The silhouette didn't move for several minutes, and I remember being thankful that, from the angle at which she sat, Alicia couldn't see it. Then, something happened that I couldn't entirely wrap my head around. The man stepped back from the glass and raised his arms, making a Y shape with his body and his limbs. Only his arms were far too long. They seemed to be double the length that they should have been, each arm about the same length as his entire body. I thought at first that he was holding something, maybe two pipes that just appeared to be an extension of his limbs, but I could clearly see two hands at the ends of the extremities. I could see 5 fingers on each hand, flopping around slightly as the man brought his arms closer to the window. Thud, thud, thud. I stood up and readied myself to shoot, but just then the sounds of sirens pierced the quiet night. The man outside banged his hands against the window one last time, and then it was as if someone had sliced his arms at the elbows. His forearms seemed to shear right off, and the man took off running before they so much as hit the ground. When the police officers announced themselves, I answered the door and explained the situation to them. 2 officers, a man and a woman, asked me a few questions about my neighbor, which I assume was necessary to establish probable cause for a search. Once finished, they told me to stay inside with the doors locked while they investigated the neighbor's house. I watched them through the window of Alicia and Jay's room. They knocked on the neighbor's door, and when no one answered, they tried the front door handle. I watched the unlocked door swing open. The 2 looked at one another and then entered. I'm not sure what they found inside that house. All I know is that when they emerged a few moments later, they both looked very disturbed. When I went outside to ask what they had found, the female officer told me simply, "Your neighbor's dead." The rest of the night was a blur of strangers in uniforms filing in and out of my neighbor's home. Some came to my porch afterwards to ask me questions, and none offered me any answers. They moved with tight-lipped efficiency, their faces guarded, their words clipped. At one point, I wandered to the side of the house and found several people photographing something on the ground outside my bedroom window. Before they could ask me to leave, I made out the gruesome shape of 2 human arms. The kids and I have been staying in my parents' apartment for months, and I think everyone, even Jay, is getting tired of the cramped living situation. We can't stay in the house. Alicia is way too traumatized for that, and I wouldn't be comfortable staying there while the murderer is still at large anyway. I want to sell the damn house. But our story going semi-viral is making that difficult. After all, who would want a house that, thanks to the news, has become permanently associated with phrases like dismemberment and days of torture, and victim barely recognizable as human? That's the end of this story. Honestly, I don't know how anyone would feel safe after that. You start thinking twice about curtains, windows, even just leaving the house. Makes you appreciate those boring, quiet neighbors for once. But also, never underestimate how weird someone can get when you think you know them. Definitely a story that'll make you check your own windows tonight. Let's continue. Imagine growing up somewhere quiet, familiar, where everyone knows the rules, but there's one place you're never supposed to speak of. And then one day, curiosity pushes you right into it. What you find there, well, it's not anything you could have expected. Get ready, because this one is really terrifying. I was born on an island that only really had one rule, the kind that wasn't spoken but lived in people's posture. The way their mouths tightened, the way their eyes avoided a certain part of the sea. We were never to talk about the island across the water. It sat to the east, a half-mile off our shoreline. You couldn't miss it. You'd see it from almost anywhere on our side, past the docks, over the tree line, from the cliffs on the northern edge where the goats grazed. It was always there, sitting still, never changing. A piece of land so close you could row to it in under an hour, though no one did. I can't remember a single adult ever naming it, not even once. And if you said something about it, even by accident, someone would shut it down immediately, not angrily, just firmly, like flicking a candle out. One time when I was little, maybe 7 or 8, I pointed across the water and asked my mother if anyone lived there. She didn't scold me. She didn't say anything at all. She just took my hand and led me inside, like I'd asked where babies come from, or what happens when you die. That kind of silence. Another time, I asked my grandfather if he'd ever been. He was cleaning fish out by the shed. He paused just a second too long before saying, "No," then added, "Never ask about it again." And that was that. It wasn't forbidden in the way dangerous things are forbidden. It was deeper, like the island didn't want to be spoken of, and the people here had agreed to let it be. Our island wasn't big. You could walk across it in a few hours if you didn't stop. There was the village near the western bay, with its stone paths and wood-slatted houses, and the small church where we held market on Sundays. A few scattered farms, a fishing dock, and the old watchtower from before my time that no one used anymore. It was quiet, steady, the kind of place where every door creaked the same way, and you knew who'd pass by just from the sound of their cough. The trade boat came once a week, usually just before noon. We never saw where it came from. It always arrived from the mist. It brought flour, salt, oil, iron tools. Letters sometimes, though no one in my family ever got any. It left with barrels of fish and boxes of preserved vegetables. No one ever left with it. Only the trader ever boarded it. He'd pass down the rope to whoever helped him load and unload, but no one else ever crossed the rail. We were a closed loop. We grew up knowing our boundaries, the sea, the woods, the cliffs, and beyond all of that, the other island, always watching, always ignored. There were 5 of us who couldn't leave it alone. Me, Jonah, Sam, Eli, and Nathan. We were kids like any others, too much energy, not enough fear. We ran barefoot through the brush, built slingshots from driftwood, dared each other to knock on the widow's door. We spent hot days pretending to be soldiers and cold nights pretending we weren't scared of ghosts. We stole things, but nothing important. Apples, candles, once a bottle of wine we didn't even like. We were just loud, restless boys. Jonah was the biggest, tall for his age, shoulders already starting to widen like his father's. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Sam was the quickest, always first to climb something, first to run, first to joke about things that made the rest of us squirm. Eli was quiet and careful, and always the one who asked what if before we did something dumb. Nathan was clever, sometimes too clever. He'd make up lies so good we believed them even after he admitted they weren't true. And then there was me. I don't know what I was in that group. I guess I was the one who remembered, the one who carried it longest. We never said it out loud, but we all watched the island, from the rocks by the southern cliff, from the upper fields when the wind cleared the trees, from the shore when we were supposed to be fishing, but spent more time staring at the horizon. We talk about it only when we were sure no one else was listening. Maybe it's a ruin, Eli once said. Like people used to live there, but something happened, Sam snorted. What? Like ghosts? Maybe it's where the trader comes from, I offered. He never says. Jonah said nothing, just stared into the distance. We didn't speak of it often, and when we did, it was always with that half-serious tone kids use when they're testing how far they can push something without making it real. But over time, the idea started to settle, not in our mouths, but in our bones, like it had been waiting there all along. We didn't plan it then, but I think we all knew we would. It was Jonah who said it first. We were behind the storehouse, the 5 of us perched on a broken cart that sank slightly in the middle, chewing through whatever scraps we'd stolen from our kitchens. Salted fish, hard bread, half-rotted apples that still had enough sweetness left in them to be worth the trouble. The kind of food that tasted better because it wasn't given to us. He didn't clear his throat or build up to it. He just said, I think we should go, like he was talking to himself. No one asked where. We all knew. That silence, the way no one looked at each other, the way we kept chewing like the words hadn't landed, that was agreement. Sam spat a seed into the dirt. Tomorrow. Jonah still didn't look up. 2 mornings. Before sunup, Nathan nodded. Eli wiped his hands on his pants. I didn't say anything, but I was already picturing the tide. We met 2 mornings later, just before sunrise, in the kind of pale, still light that feels like the world hasn't started yet. The moon was still visible, hanging low in the sky like it hadn't made up its mind to leave. The dirt was damp from night air, and everything around us smelled like the ocean. Not fresh like wind and salt, stale like old ropes and barnacles and the inside of a bait barrel. We didn't bring much. A couple flasks of water, a loaf of bread wrapped in a cloth, some rope, a pocket knife none of us could use right. Eli brought his father's compass. The face was cracked, and the needle had a habit of drifting even when you held it steady, but he brought it anyway. Sam brought a hammer for some reason, though he never said why. Jonah had taken the skiff from the far end of the dock, where the unused boats were kept. It wasn't in good shape, but it floated. That was enough. It creaked when we pushed it into the shallows, and for a second I thought the sound might carry and wake someone. But the village above us stayed dark. No lights, no footsteps, just the soft hiss of water and the thump of oars against the side of the hull. We climbed in. Jonah and Nathan took the oars first, setting a rhythm without speaking. The rest of us sat in silence, our backs to the shore. I didn't look back. The water was colder than I expected. Not freezing, but deep cold, like it came from underneath something. There wasn't much wind, just a faint breeze that moved in slow, irregular pulses. It brushed the surface of the sea in places. I watched the light from the sky ripple and disappear beneath the oars as we moved. As we got farther out, the shape of the island came into view, slowly, like it was pushing through fog we hadn't noticed before. I'd seen it all my life, but only from shore. Now, from the water, it felt different, bigger, heavier. The trees formed a jagged silhouette against the sky, and the hills behind them looked like sleeping animals just starting to stir. The closer we got, the more it felt familiar. The shape of the coastline, the slope of the land. It was like rowing toward a memory, one you couldn't fully place until you were inside it. There was a moment, maybe halfway across, where I turned to look behind us and saw that our own island was already fading into mist. A low fog was moving in fast, curling over the water like smoke through grass. The beach, the houses, even the trees, gone. Just a soft grey smear behind us. It looked farther away than it should have. "Fins," Sam said, and he said it too calmly, like he was trying not to cause a stir. We all looked. Just to the right of the boat, something slid under the surface. Long, smooth. It passed without sound. Then another, and another. 4, maybe 5. Just below the waterline, circling in wide, slow arcs. I couldn't see their shapes fully, but they moved like they had purpose. "Sharks," Jonah said under his breath. "Black tips." I think Eli leaned forward. "How can you tell?" Jonah didn't answer. He just started rowing faster. So did Nathan. Neither of them said a word, but the skiff began to lurch forward harder with each pull. Sam reached down for the hammer in his bag and gripped it like it would make a difference. The boat started to wobble with the force of the strokes. Water splashed. The nose tilted. I tried to stay calm, but the air around me had gone thin, and every muscle in my body was bracing for something I couldn't see. The island was close now, close enough to see the rock line clearly. No dock, no paths, just broken shoreline and thick brush that came almost down to the water. A crooked tree leaned out over the water near a narrow stretch of beach, barely wide enough to stand on. It looked untouched, uninviting. Then came the hit. A soft thud, followed by a jolt that rocked the skiff, like we'd slammed into something just below the surface. "Reef," Jonah barked. The boat tilted violently to one side, then the other. Water surged in through a crack below the center bench. Cold, fast, rising. Something heavy clattered against the boards, maybe the hammer. A second later, one of the bags split open and spilled across the bench. Bread, rope, the knife, all sliding toward the low side. "Out," someone yelled. We didn't argue. We moved. The skiff was already sinking under us, one side dipping hard. I kicked off the bench and dove, not even sure if I was jumping or falling. Water swallowed me to the neck. The cold hit like a punch, and my breath locked up in my chest. Behind me, splashing, gasping, limbs crashing into water. I could hear it all, but didn't look back. The current fought harder than I expected. My arms were sluggish, my legs heavier than they should have been. I kicked toward shore, every breath shallow and burning. Something brushed past my foot, too fast to register, too soft to be a log. I didn't stop. The distance couldn't have been more than 30 yards, but it felt like swimming through glass, the kind that keeps pulling you down instead of letting you break through. When my fingers finally hit rock, I hauled myself forward so fast I scraped both elbows raw. I didn't care. I just wanted to be out. One by one, The others crashed onto the beach behind me, crawling, dragging, coughing up seawater. The skiff was already gone, either swallowed by the reef or drifting, half flooded, back into the mist. None of us had our bags, no compass, no food, no knife. The hammer was probably at the bottom of the sea by now. Everything we'd packed was gone. We stood there shivering, dripping, catching our breath. One by one, we looked at each other, counting. 5 of us. No one missing. No one hurt. At least not badly. Then we looked around. It took a few seconds before anyone spoke. "This is the same place," Sam said, slower this time. "It's the same beach." It almost looked like it. Same crooked tree leaning out over the water like it was eavesdropping. Same cluster of black rocks jutting up along the curve of the cove. The same soft slope leading into the tree line beyond. Even the shape of the shoreline felt familiar, like we'd looped through time instead of space. Jonah turned in a full circle, scanning the trees and the shore, and then the water again. "We didn't go anywhere," he said. His voice didn't sound angry. It sounded resigned. Eli was squinting at the ocean, his face tight. "We rowed across. We saw the island. We left." He didn't say it like he was arguing. He said it like he was trying to remind himself. No one responded. We started walking, slow at first, still trying to make sense of it. The beach looked nearly identical to our own, but it wasn't. The rocks were a little too sharp. The slope rose at a slightly different angle. The tree line was thinner, the color of the grass not quite right, close enough to confuse us, different enough to keep us on edge. There was a narrow path leading off the beach and into the woods, just wide enough for 2 of us to walk side by side. None of us remembered it being there before. The air was different as we climbed, heavy and warm, like the weather had changed without warning. The trees swayed gently, but the grass up on the slope moved just a little too much. Jonah took the lead, Sam just behind him, then Nathan, Eli and me. We'd only made it about 30 or 40 paces up the trail when Nathan came to a stop. At first, I thought he was just catching his breath, but then I noticed where he was looking, up the slope toward the tall grass hugging the hillside. I followed his gaze and froze. She was so close, a very tall woman. She wasn't walking, wasn't moving at all, just standing in the grass like she'd been waiting for us to see her. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the wind kept going like she wasn't part of the world. The grass around her swayed. Her dress clung damply to her legs, but she didn't shift, didn't breathe. Her arms hung straight at her sides, too straight, too heavy, like she didn't know how they were supposed to work. She stood maybe 10 yards uphill, close enough to see the wrongness in how she carried herself. Her posture looked almost human, like a figure drawn from memory by someone who'd never actually seen one. That's when I realized what had hooked in my brain. Everything around her moved, but she didn't. Not even a twitch. "Do you see her?" Eli's voice was low, tight, like he wasn't sure if he was talking to us or himself. Of course we saw her. None of us had looked away. It felt like blinking might break some invisible barrier and make her come closer. Then she smiled. I didn't understand why it made my stomach twist at first. It wasn't exaggerated. It wasn't monstrous. It was subtle, just wrong. Her mouth stretched into what should have been a smile, but the shape was off. The corners bent down instead of up, like someone had tried to mimic it from memory and gotten the geometry wrong. But the rest of her face, the parts that move when you smile, those were perfect. The cheeks lifted, the skin around her eyes crinkled. That mismatch was worse than anything else. Her eyes were kind, genuinely kind, not cold, not distant. She looked at us the way a mother looks at her children. There was warmth in her expression, and it made my skin crawl in a way I still can't explain. I can tell you this, if I'd known then what I know now about that woman, I would have turned and swum back out into the water. I would have taken my chances with the sharks, gladly. She raised her arm. The motion was slow, unnatural, like her joints didn't belong to her. Her hand lifted until one long, stiff finger pointed straight at us. We didn't scream. We didn't run. We just started backing away, careful not to turn around, like we thought not facing her would make things worse. Sam bumped into Jonah, who muttered a curse under his breath. "Why is she pointing at us?" Sam asked, barely audible. Nobody answered. I kept watching her finger. Something felt off, the angle. It wasn't quite right. Eli squinted, stepping half a pace forward. "Wait," he murmured. "I don't think she's pointing at us." I looked from her finger to her face. He was right. Her eyes weren't on us. They were aimed just above our heads. Her arm cut across the air in a straight line, not to us, but over us. That's when I felt it, that slow pull in my gut, the primal feeling that something was behind me. We turned, all at once, and saw 5 people standing in the woods behind us, just beyond the path, half shaded by the trees. Not hidden, just waiting. They looked like us. Same height, same hair, same builds. But they were wrong in ways you didn't notice at first. The clothes were mirrored, buttons on the wrong side, shoelaces tied in configurations that didn't make sense. Nathan's double had a tear in his shirt, but on the opposite side. Eli's double stood with arms crossed like he always did when nervous, except the arms were reversed, left where the right should be. They weren't moving, just standing there, perfectly spaced, aligned, like mannequins arranged in a storefront. We didn't speak. They didn't either, just stared, expressionless, like they were waiting for something. I stepped back without meaning to. The crunch of leaves underfoot sounded deafening. The air had changed, not colder, not darker, just wrong, like the rules we trusted had quietly stopped applying. I glanced back at the woman. She was still there, no longer pointing. Her body hadn't moved an inch, but her head was pushing forward, just her head, tilting, straining toward us like it was being reeled in. Her neck stretched too far, vertebrae visible under skin that looked too tight to bend, like she was trying to close the distance without taking a step, like she wanted to reach us with her face alone. She stared at us with that same backward smile, mouth bent into a shape sorrow should never take, and those warm, impossibly kind eyes. That contradiction, grief twisted into joy, settled in her face like it had always belonged there. Her eyes were on us now, not the doubles. US. I could feel the weight of her attention pressing against my chest. Eli made a sound, a sharp, shaky breath in that collapsed into a sob. Quick, uncontrolled. That was all it took. Her body didn't move. Her face didn't change. She just opened her mouth and screamed. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound like anything that should exist. It started low, like the groaning of a ship under pressure. Then it rose into something sharp and metallic, like rusted metal being torn apart underwater. The pitch climbed beyond what a person should be able to produce. We hit the ground instantly, hands to our ears. The sound wasn't just loud. It was inside us, in our bones, our teeth, our skulls. Sam was yelling something, but I couldn't hear it. All I could hear was her. And then it stopped. No fade, no echo, just gone. The silence that followed hit just as hard. My hearing felt muffled, like I'd been underwater. For a few seconds, I could only hear my own breathing, sharp and uneven. When I looked up, she was gone. And the others, the ones who looked like us, they were gone too. Disappeared without a trace, like they'd never been there at all. "I want to go back," Eli said behind us. His voice cracked halfway through. "We shouldn't have come here." "We need to leave," none of us answered. We didn't have a plan for any of this. We didn't even know what this was. "I think we are home," Nathan muttered. But it came out wrong. No one agreed. No one even looked at him, because whatever this place was, it only looked like home. And now it knew we were here. We had no boat, no choice. So we moved inland. There wasn't a conversation about it, no group decision. Just a quiet understanding that staying where we were felt worse than pushing deeper into the island. We didn't know what we were looking for, maybe shelter, maybe sense. But doing nothing seemed like asking for whatever came next. The forest swallowed us quickly. The path that had been there a few minutes ago disappeared behind a wall of brush and bark. The deeper we walked, the stranger everything became. The trees were wrong, not in obvious ways, nothing that would scream out to someone who just arrived. But we knew trees. We'd grown up climbing them, chopping them, counting the rings of ones that had fallen in storms. And these felt like copies, imitations, like something had tried to recreate them from memory and missed the proportions. Too many knots, branches that twisted back toward the trunk, bark that felt like damp cloth when your hand brushed past it. The ground was soft, but not with moss or leaves. It felt loose, like something had recently shifted underneath it. The air smelled like iron and mildew, and something sweet rotting deeper in the woods. Eventually, we found a clearing, no wider than a fishing boat. A fallen tree split it down the middle, half uprooted, with thick green moss crawling along its trunk like veins. Jonas sat down on it, hands on his knees, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" he asked. No one had an answer. Sam was pacing again, running a hand through his hair over and over. Eli stood with his back to a tree, eyes scanning the brush as if he expected the woman, or something else, to step through it at any moment. That's when we heard it. A click. Soft mechanical, out of place. Not a branch snapping or the wind shifting, but the distinct sound of a latch lifting. A door opening somewhere ahead of us in the woods. None of us said to move toward it, but we did. No one suggested turning back. No one asked if we were sure. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it real. Or maybe because that sound, the quiet, metallic certainty of it, felt like a thread pulled taut, and we couldn't stop ourselves from following where it led. As we moved, the forest didn't grow thicker. It grew darker. The light filtering through the trees lost its sharpness. Not just shade, like the sunlight itself had started to dim before it reached the branches. The air pressed in again, not sharp, like on the beach, heavier, like something watching had started to breathe. Eventually, the trees broke into another clearing. The grass here was shorter, yellowed and dry, crunching underfoot, and in the middle of it stood a house. None of us spoke at first. It wasn't broken down or ruined, just old. Weathered boards, sun-faded paint. A small porch sloped slightly to one side, and the roof looked like it had sagged a little in the middle, like something heavy had once sat on it. It looked like the kind of house someone might still live in. We approached slowly, cautious, not curious. Something about it made our steps slow down without us talking about it. I kept scanning the windows, half expecting someone to be standing just behind them, watching. Nathan stopped before the others did. He tilted his head slightly, then pointed to the corner of the porch. "My dad made a post like that," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He walked a few steps closer, squinting at the frame around the door, then to the woodwork under the windows. "It's like our house," he said. "It's not the same, but it's close." He stepped up onto the porch. We followed, hesitant. None of us wanted to be near the place, but no one wanted to let Nathan go alone either. The door was already cracked open, just a few inches. Nathan hesitated anyway, like something might still reach out and shut it. Nothing did. so he pushed it open the rest of the way. The smell hit first, just stale air and old wood, like a room that hadn't been opened in too long. The kind of place where dust doesn't float, it just settles into the walls. It looked small from the outside, but the inside felt deeper, bigger than it should have been, like the walls had stretched just enough to be wrong. Inside, the light was dim and orange tinted, like it was filtering through the wrong kind of glass. The hallway was narrow, a coat rack on one side, faint scuff marks on the floor, a chair in the corner that looked familiar, though I couldn't say why. Nathan stepped in first. We followed, slow. Nathan was quiet. He was looking at the photographs on the wall. They were of his family, his parents, his sister, him. But everything was reversed. His dad's watch was on the wrong wrist. His sister's birthmark had switched sides. The smiles looked normal at first, until you stared too long, too symmetrical, too wide. To the right, a doorway led into what looked like a living room, mirrored. On our island, Nathan's living room was to the left when you walked in. Here, it was flipped. Not just the layout, everything. The furniture was the same kind. Not identical, but close. Same colors, same wear patterns. A clock on the wall ticked just a half beat slower than it should have. The painting above the mantel showed a landscape we all recognized, except the river ran the wrong direction. "I want to go," Eli said behind me. His voice was barely there. None of us answered. We just kept looking. The room held us. Not physically, but in that way a nightmare does, where the air feels thick and stepping backward might wake something up. We weren't frozen, just slow, careful. Jonah was eyeing the bookshelf. Eli hovered near the fireplace. I stood by the wall, watching the second hand on the clock stutter with each tick. Sam moved toward the painting above the mantel, staring at it like he expected it to blink. No one talked. We were all too deep in it, scanning corners, studying the little wrong details, trying to figure out what this place was. Then Sam turned, brow furrowed. "Where's Nathan?" Every head snapped around. He wasn't there. He hadn't made a sound. No footsteps, no door creak. He'd vanished like air. We searched the house fast, calling his name, moving from room to room in a rush that didn't feel loud, just clumsy. Like our panic didn't want to make noise but couldn't help it. There weren't many places he could have gone. The hallway led to a small kitchen, a stairwell, and a narrow back room with a locked door. Jonah tried the handle and found it wouldn't budge. No light under the crack, no sound from inside. Sam ran up the stairs 2 at a time. Eli and I closed behind. They creaked under us like normal stairs, nothing theatrical, nothing dramatic, but every groan from the wood felt too sharp, like the house was responding. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs. One was empty, bare except for a bed frame and a window nailed shut. The second had a dresser, a mirror with a cracked corner, and more photographs, a different version of Nathan's family. This time, the faces were missing from some of the frames, blurred out or too dark to see. But no Nathan. When we reached the bottom, Jonah wasn't there. We found him just outside, a few steps off the porch, arms crossed. "I checked around the house too," he said, not looking at us. "He's not here." We stood there, all 4 of us, facing the house like it might give something back. The open door gaped in front of us, cold air leaking out like it didn't belong to this place. Sam looked at me. "Do we go back in?" No one replied. Then footsteps from inside, slow, measured, getting closer. The porch creaked. Nathan stepped into the doorway. Just stood there like he'd never left. His face was blank. His shirt was damp. None of us spoke. No one moved. He stepped forward slowly, one hand brushing the frame like it grounded him. He looked rested, calm. His clothes were the same, but the fit seemed off, like they belonged to a version of him just slightly smaller or built differently. He blinked, squinted at us, then frowned, puzzled. "What?" he said. "Why are you all staring at me?" Eli was the first to speak. "Where the hell did you go?" Nathan tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "I was upstairs. We checked upstairs," I said. "Every room." Nathan looked at each of us, one by one. His face was blank at first, but then something shifted. A flicker of a smile that came and went too fast. Not warm, just performed. "I saw you," he said, "through the railing. You were in the hall. You just walked off." That didn't make sense. We'd torn through every room. He wasn't there. No one had seen him. And there was no way he could have missed the noise we made. I was watching his hands. Nathan always rubbed his thumb against his knuckle when he was nervous. A little tick, unconscious. This Nathan's hands were still, relaxed, at his sides. He stepped down from the porch. None of us moved. "Are we going?" he asked. Same voice, same face. But the rhythm was off by a beat. Too calm, too smooth. No one answered. We just stared, waiting for something to twitch wrong. I opened my mouth to say something, but I couldn't make the words form. Not the right ones anyway. We just started moving, brisk, determined, not quite running, but no longer willing to stop. The sky was dimming fast, the woods deepening in color, and everything around us seemed to press in with a quiet that felt more like watching than stillness. Jonah walked up front. Sam stayed beside me. Eli and Nathan trailed behind us, a little slower, not too far back at first. We were almost to the beach when it hit us. A voice cracked open behind us, rasping, high-pitched, like a throat trying to speak for the first time and tearing itself apart in the process. There was the shape of a word, but the sound didn't know how to hold it. We froze. None of us looked back. "Run," Jonah said firmly. That was it. So we ran. Branches whipped our arms, roots caught our feet. The path bent the wrong way more than once, and every tree looked like one we'd already passed. But we kept moving, pushing forward through the tightening forest until the trees finally broke open again, and we saw it. The dock, warped and crooked, half sunken at the far end. A boat was tied to it, not the one we'd taken, but something older, narrower, still afloat. We stopped at the edge of the road right next to the boats and turned. I checked to make sure everyone was with us. Eli was not. I watched the clearing, expecting to see him jogging up behind, cursing or out of breath. But the bend in the path stayed empty. We waited. A few more seconds passed. Then we heard it. A scream, ragged and sharp, echoing through the trees like it didn't belong to a voice, but something breaking. Not words, just pain. Jonah moved first. He stepped away from the boats, 1 foot toward the woods. And that's when she appeared. She walked slowly out from the bend of the clearing, circling into view. Cradled in her arms was Eli. He was still screaming. His body writhed, legs kicking, hands clawing at her shoulders. She didn't struggle. She didn't even seem to notice. Her arms were wrapped tightly around him, pulling him against her chest like a mother calming a child in the middle of a tantrum. Her face was fixed on us. Not Eli, not the forest, just us. Her eyes never left ours, like she wanted us to see everything. And we did. That same downward smile carved her mouth into a deep, strained curve. It looked like the expression had been sculpted into her face with wire, pulled tight and wrong. But her eyes told a different story. Soft, glassy, full of warmth, like she was watching something beautiful unfold. As she held Eli tighter, her lips quivered slightly, as if the shape was difficult to maintain. Her cheeks twitched, like they couldn't decide whether to frown or laugh. She was trying to be gentle. She wanted us to know that. Eli was screaming, but it wasn't just fear. It was pain. Real pain. The kind that stopped sounding human. His arms pushed against her shoulders, clawing, slapping. Nothing that made a difference. His legs kicked out violently, his whole body thrashing like an animal in a snare. The heels of his boots barely scraped against the dirt as he was being held up. And still, she looked at us, like we were the ones she was holding. Sam made a sound, half a sob, half a curse, and stepped forward. Jonah grabbed his arm. "We can't," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We can't." But we all took a step anyway. I did. I felt my foot move before I meant it to, like something in me couldn't stand still and watch. Then Eli screamed again, louder this time, high and desperate, raw at the edges, the kind of sound that burns your throat even when you're not the one making it. He kept kicking, kept trying. She didn't flinch, didn't tighten her grip suddenly. It wasn't violence, it was pressure, steady, controlled, like she was soothing him into silence, one bone at a time. His screams of agony unraveled into a choking, broken gasp, like even his voice was giving out. Then we heard it, a single crack, subtle, quiet, like a thick branch snapping underfoot. Eli jerked once in her arms, then stopped moving. His head lolled against her shoulder. His arms dangled at his sides, empty of fight. She didn't stop smiling. She held him there, still watching us, her eyes locked onto ours like she wanted to see what we'd do next. Her fingers brushed his back in slow, meaningless circles, like she was soothing him to sleep. Jonah stepped backward first, then Sam. I followed. I didn't even think, I just moved. The boat scraped against the rock as we pulled it into the water. Nathan hadn't spoken. I looked at him once, just once, and wished I hadn't. He wasn't crying, wasn't breathing hard. He was standing completely still, watching her, and there was something small and soft at the corner of his mouth, an attempted smile, just enough to be seen, just enough to be wrong. We climbed into the boat, pushed off. No one looked back except me. She was still standing at the edge of the trees, Eli's body limp against her chest. One arm wrapped around him like he was hers, and the other lifted slowly. She waved. We didn't speak on the water. None of us touched the oars at first. The tide pulled us gently, like the sea itself was too tired to fight. The sun had almost slipped beneath the horizon, casting everything in that strange copper light that makes the world feel unreal, like you're seeing it through memory instead of your own eyes. Jonah finally took one oar, Sam the other. I sat in the middle, arms locked around my knees, staring at the ripple patterns trailing behind us. I don't remember when we lost sight of the mirrored island. I just remember the moment the real one came into view. The same island we left. Same houses, same hills, same docks. But we didn't come back whole. One of us was dead, and one of us came back wrong. There was a crowd at the shoreline. People from the village. Parents, a few older brothers. A grandmother with her arms folded tight. They weren't shouting or pacing or scanning the horizon. They just stood there, like they'd been waiting. The boat scraped against the sand. Hands reached out. My father, Sam's mother, Jonah's uncle. They helped us out without a word, their eyes flicking from face to face, counting. When they didn't find Eli, no one said it out loud. They just knew. His mother began to cry, quiet at first, then sharp and shuddering. His father stood behind her, unmoving, staring past us at the horizon, like he was still hoping to see his son come into view. One of the older villagers, maybe the priest, maybe just someone who'd done this before, put a hand on her back, and gently led her away. She didn't resist. She just let herself be led, walking like someone made of paper. Someone reached for Nathan and pulled him ashore, calm and deliberate. His mother rushed forward next, throwing her arms around him, clutching him so hard it looked painful. She was crying too, but it was different. Her hands twisted in the back of his shirt, but her face stayed tense, like she was trying to convince herself this was really him. Like she already knew she'd have to let go again. Nathan didn't hug her at first. He stood stiff for a second. Then slowly, he wrapped his arms around her. When she pulled back to look at him, something shifted in her face. Her hands stayed on his shoulders, but her fingers had gone stiff. Her eyes scanned him like she didn't recognize what she was holding. Nathan smiled. "You're holding me like I died." His voice was almost playful. Almost. He let out a small laugh, quiet, thin, like he wasn't sure if the joke had landed. It was too practiced. It started too fast and ended too late, hanging in the air like it didn't know when to stop. His smile stayed in place, but it didn't settle right. The corners of his mouth began to pull down instead of up. At first it looked like a twitch, then it kept going, bending further, stretching the muscles in his face into that same strained expression we'd seen on her. A smile that was trying to mimic joy, but failing at the geometry of it. His eyes didn't match it. They looked heavy, glassy, and full of something that didn't belong in a smile. Regret, maybe, or grief. He wasn't afraid, just resigned, like something inside him understood what came next and didn't try to fight it. His mother let go of his arms. She took a step back, one hand covering her mouth. Behind her, the others had already started to move. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't argue. It was as if the whole village had already made peace with what needed to happen. A few men stepped forward. Jonah's uncle, Sam's father, a neighbor I didn't know by name. Nathan didn't resist. He didn't ask why. He just stood there, shoulders low, his eyes still on his mother. One hand reached for his sleeve, another for his collar. They escorted him to the sea like they'd done it before. No ceremony, no shouting. Just the sound of the tide and the low murmur of footsteps on wet sand. They held him under until the waves stopped moving around them, and then they let him go. I still wonder if the real Nathan died in that house, or if we left him there, alive, watching us walk away. Sometimes I think what came back with us wasn't pretending. I think it believed it was him. We begged our parents to send someone back, a boat, a search party, anything. But they just looked through us, like we hadn't spoken, like we hadn't seen what we saw. By the next day, no one even said his name. Wow, that was something else. You think you know the world you grew up in, the people around you, even your own friends. And then one night, everything you trusted feels like a lie. Makes you wonder what's out there, just beyond sight, waiting. Definitely a story that'll have you staring at the horizon a little longer tonight. The next story is titled, "I Found Home Videos of My Family That Shouldn't Exist." Imagine uncovering something from your past, something meant to be gone, but it's alive again in a way you can't explain. A laugh you thought you'd never hear, rooms that look familiar yet wrong, and a presence that feels like it's looking right at you. My brother died when I was 7 years old. He was 13. He drowned in the lake down the street from our house. My parents never touched his room. They tried once, but they couldn't do it. Too raw. After that, the door just stayed shut. His room became a kind of museum of him. That was 11 years ago. His room still looks the same. This morning, while I was packing for college, I thought I'd finally go in there. My plan wasn't anything dramatic. I just wanted to grab a few hoodies, maybe a keepsake or two to take with me. Something to hold on to when I got homesick, Full transparency. I've been in his room plenty of times before. I've sat on his bed. I've looked through his shelves, but I've never really gone digging. That felt wrong, and I really had no inclination to. I just miss my brother. That wasn't my intention today either. It wasn't my intention to find a stack of DVDs shoved into the bottom drawer of his dresser. There were 3 of them, just labeled 1, 2, and 3. The only DVD player in the house is still hooked up to his old TV. Everything else went streaming years ago. For a minute, I told myself not to do it. They weren't mine. They probably didn't matter. I picked up some of the items I'd collected, put the DVDs back in his drawer, and returned to my room. Tonight, they started calling to me. I know how that sounds. I know you're thinking it was just my curiosity eating at me. But it wasn't like that. It felt physical, a pull in my chest. So I crept back across the hall, slipped into his room, locked the door behind me so my parents wouldn't hear, and I put in the first DVD. It was a home video. I didn't even know we had any. I don't remember my parents ever owning a camera. The video starts with static, then clears just enough to show something. The picture is muddy, warped. It could be the living room, but the furniture looks wrong. Everything is too big or too small, shifting every time the frame jitters. Sometimes it almost looks like a bedroom, sometimes like a hallway. No faces, no clear shapes, just flickering shadows that don't match what the voices are saying. Because there are voices, familiar ones. Laughter, clinking dishes, and my mum calling my brother's name. It sounds like family in the background, just out of sight. I hear my brother's laughter, and the sound swallows me whole. It rings through my head, bouncing off the bones that make up my skull. Then, beneath it, is another voice. Low, deliberate, close enough that you couldn't miss it. You haven't noticed yet. Then the video cut off, just like that. I scrambled to replay it, not even thinking about the other 2 discs still stacked under the TV. I just wanted to hear him laugh again. That laugh. I tried not to think about the end, though the fear of it was crawling slowly up my spine as I hit play. Because the way it spoke, it sounded like it wasn't part of the recording at all, like it was speaking to the camera. To me. I pressed play again, this time pausing every few seconds, desperate to make sense of what I was seeing. But nothing held still. Everything on the film looked almost familiar, like a room you swear you've been in but can't place. The walls are a little too narrow, and the colours are washed out enough to make it something you've never seen before. It made me feel like my brain was short-circuiting. Then I froze the frame just before the moment he laughed. And there it was. A caption, faint and yellow, burned into the corner of the screen. July 30th, 2015. 7 months after my brother drowned. My first thought was that it was a glitch. It had to be. The camera must have been off by a year. There's no other explanation. I forced myself to breathe and to shove back the rising panic. Then I pressed play again. His laugh filled the room, and for a second, my fear washed away. It was just him again. He was alive, warm, present, a bittersweet rush of comfort and grief. But then the voice returned, closer this time, wet against the microphone, broken and cutting in and out like static. You noticed. I ripped the DVD out of the player and threw it across the room. I don't even know why I did it. Adrenaline, I guess. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't control myself. I'm trying to think of logical explanations. I want to believe there's one. But every reason I come up with feels paper thin. I just bolted back to my room and dove under the covers. Like that would help. I don't want to watch the other videos. I don't. But I can feel them pulling at me. Like they're not finished. Like I owe them something. I can't sleep. It's dark. It's late. The rain just started. The bathroom faucet always drips, but tonight it sounds so much louder. You could almost confuse it for footsteps. That was something else. You start thinking about what's been left behind in your own home, the things you thought were harmless, the memories that were supposed to fade. And then you wonder if it can be so close, so ordinary, and still feel wrong. What else might be hiding just out of sight? The next story is titled, "A Stranger Approached My Car at Night with a Warning. Check the Back Seat." Imagine finishing a late shift, grabbing some food, and just trying to get home. Then, out of nowhere, a stranger appears and tells you there's someone hiding where you least expect it. You'd want to laugh it off, right? Except that's when everything starts to feel completely off. I like to think that I take my personal safety very seriously. I don't stand too close to the road while waiting for the walk signal. I have my location shared with my sister and mum. I keep my wits about me when I'm out in public, and I try not to dawdle after getting into my car. If I had only been more diligent about that last rule, I might not be in the situation I'm in now. Early this morning, just after midnight, I was sitting in my parked car outside of my favorite grocery store. I was exhausted from picking up a friend's evening shift, and so I stopped to grab dinner on my way home from work. The store is in an isolated part of town, but I had never felt unsafe in the area. Then again, I'd never been so late at night. The second I exited the store with my purchase, the old cashier closed up shop for the night and turned off all the lights in the building. For some reason, I did something I never do. I started eating in my car. As a precaution, I try not to linger in isolated parking lots, especially as a young woman who often has to run errands after dark. Maybe it was the hunger, or maybe the fact that, due to a recent breakup, my house hasn't felt all that welcoming in the past few weeks. In any case, I was in no rush to return home. I pulled up an episode of The Terror on my phone and settled in to eat. I enjoyed a few minutes of blissful peace and quiet before a shout pierced through the night. I looked up from my phone and was surprised to find a woman standing in front of my car, waving her arms at me. My car was parked right in front of the store, facing towards the building, and there was only a thin sidewalk separating my vehicle from the store's exterior. I hadn't seen her coming at all. It was like she had emerged from the brick wall before me. She rounded my car, coming to a stop beside the driver's side window. She then started pointing at the ground, the universal signal for roll your window down. Fat chance, I thought. Though she looked sane and kempt, I had no clue what her intentions were. In fact, I felt pretty vindicated in always locking my car doors immediately after entering. The woman, perhaps seeing I was making no move to exit my vehicle, then told me something no one wants to hear. "Hey," she shouted, "there's someone in your back seat." My mouth went dry. Time seemed to slow as 1,000 horror movie scenes raced through my head. I could almost feel the piano wire digging into my neck, the barrel pressing into my temple. I undid my seatbelt and prepared to launch myself out of the car. Now that the intruder knew I was aware of their presence, would I even have enough time to run? With one hand on the door handle, I stole a glance into the rearview mirror and saw no one. My car is a compact hatchback, meaning there is very little room for a person to hide in my cabin. Even in my exhausted state, I would have noticed someone upon looking into the mirror. My terror fading to confusion, I turned around in my seat, surveying the cabin with my own eyes, and confirmed that there was no one in my back seat. Click. When I turned back around, the woman had taken another step closer to my car. Her body was barely a foot from my door, and her fingers were wrapped around the handle. There were a few more deep clicks as she tried, unsuccessfully, to open the locked door. I raised my gaze, and she gave me an odd smile, as though she and I were sharing a private joke. For the first time, using the faint glow of the street lamp, I took a closer look at the woman's face. Her skin was stretched tightly across her skull, making her thin mouth and nostrils appear as though they'd been cut onto her. Her eyes were deep-set and ovate, and her teeth seemed both too small and too numerous. I allowed myself a brief moment to gawk at the face before me, and then I threw my car into reverse and hightailed it out of the lot. For a few disheartening seconds, the woman held onto the door, keeping in step with my vehicle as I backed up. Luckily, she soon let go, and I drove away, my mind racing with the realization that the woman was trying to bait me out of my car. Even more disturbing was the fact that it had almost worked. I wondered if she had others with her that I simply hadn't seen, and what she had wanted from me. I hoped I had narrowly escaped a robbery as opposed to something much more sinister. I got back to my house 20 minutes later. Still shaken from my encounter, I rushed inside the house and made sure that all of my doors and windows were locked. My exhaustion did little to soothe my nerves. My mind played tricks on me as I got ready for bed, conjuring up flashes of the woman's face in the dark corners of my house. Once I finally fell asleep, my fears followed me from the waking world. I had a long, vivid nightmare, most of which I've either forgotten or is irrelevant to this account. All I know is that when I jolted awake some hours later, it was to the sound of a frantic banging on my front door. I sat up in bed, unsure if I was still dreaming or not. My alarm clock read 4:17. It was far too early for someone to be knocking on my door unless there was some kind of emergency, which, given the forcefulness of the knocks, there may have been. Slowly, I rose from my bed and inched towards the entryway. I had never before been in such a situation and was at somewhat of a loss as to how to react. I didn't smell a fire, thankfully, but that didn't mean all was well. Suddenly, I heard a man's voice calling out my name in a questioning tone. It sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. "Who is it?" I called back. "Brian," answered the disembodied voice, and relief washed over me. My neighbor, Brian, lived in the house across the street. We weren't close exactly, but I often saw him walking down the block with his dog, Bailey. I turned on the entryway light, but as I was still in my sleepwear, I didn't want to open the door unless I had to. Instead, I called back to him. "What's the matter?" "Well," he began. I heard his voice crack, and he cleared his throat. "Do you have someone over right now?" "What?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "No, I don't." "Why do you ask?" "Well, the dog had to go out, and while I was in the yard with him, I thought I saw someone in your front window. Someone who didn't look quite right." I stilled, feeling as though I were in some terrible dream. Turning around and glancing down the dark hallway, I wished I had turned on more lights on my way to answer the door. "She followed you home," I thought. "She's in your house with you right now." I was ready to bolt out the door into the cold, but by some miracle, I had just enough presence of mind left to consider my neighbor's words more carefully. Something was wrong. I stepped away from the door. "Are you all right, Brian?" He cleared his throat again, and when he next spoke, his voice sounded slightly different from before, as though he were testing out a new timbre. "Of course, I just got a bit of a cold here, but I still wanted to check in on you." My voice wavered as I voiced a question to my neighbor. "But your dog? Isn't it a girl?" Brian didn't respond. My mind reeled in the torturous silence, trying to discern whether the threat was outside the door or inside the house with me. After a full minute of complete stillness, the handle to my front door began to move. It rotated downwards as far as it could before the lock stopped it. then shook as the person on the other side of my door pulled on the handle. This happened several more times as the person tested my lock, and then there was a powerful bang, as though someone had rammed into my door with all their might. After that, there was silence again. I stood frozen in place for another minute. I had no peephole, but I worked up the nerve to walk into the living room and peer through the blinds into my front yard. In the distance, walking down the street away from my house, was a figure. Although I couldn't see the face, something deep within me knew it was the same person who had tried to open my car door. I watched her walk away into the quiet night until she disappeared from my view. Needless to say, I didn't get much sleep for the rest of the night. I split my time between roaming the perimeter of my house, looking for anything suspicious, and sitting in my kitchen running the events of the night over in my mind. The most likely explanation was that I'd been dreaming. After all, I'd nearly been baited into opening my door to a potential criminal just hours before. So it made sense that I'd have a nightmare about a similar situation. Then again, I had never in my entire life had a dream so vivid. Maybe somehow the woman really did follow me home. She easily could have stuck a tracker on my car, but how in the world did she know Brian's name? And how had she impersonated him so well? The sun is setting now. I haven't left the house all day. I've been too haunted by the idea of someone or multiple someones trying to draw me out into the open. No matter how many times I check the house, I still feel as though I catch glimpses of the woman in my periphery, of her beady eyes and uncanny smile. I suppose I should try to get some sleep now. Impossible, as that seems at this point. I just needed to jot this down before I went to bed, in case A, anything happens to me, and B, you ever think about blindly trusting the warnings of a stranger. That story is done, and I think I need to change my pants. It's one of those stories that makes you triple check locks, glance at every dark corner, and wonder how someone could get so close without you even noticing. It's a reminder that sometimes danger doesn't announce itself with a bang. It just quietly shows up. If you enjoyed this batch as much as I did, consider liking the video and subscribing, since I'll try to post these every night. Until then, take care and have a great rest of your night.